Everyone thought she was just a sweet old lady, but they didn't know the half of it. Come closer, my darlings. Pull up a chair. Yes, that one. The one with the worn-out cushion your mother loves so much. The house is quiet now, isn't it? It's my favorite time of day, when the sun begins to bleed below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that I can just see through that window over there. In these moments, the only sounds are the gentle rhythmic hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen, a constant companion for 50 years, and the deep, solemn tick-tock of the grandfather clock your grandfather Michael bought at a flea market. The year your mother was born. Tick-tock. Another second gone. Another heartbeat closer to the end. I suppose when you get to my age, you start counting time in heartbeats rather than days. You look at me sitting here in my favorite armchair, the one with the permanent indentations from a lifetime of use, with the heavy, multicolored afghan you knitted for me draped over my frail knees, and you see Elena, Grandma Elena, your matriarch, a woman whose face is a veritable roadmap of wrinkles, each line and crease a testament to a story you think. You know by heart, the story of a brave war survivor, a devoted widow, a loving mother, a doting grandmother. You see a woman who is as familiar and comforting as the smell of cinnamon and yeast, of the bread I still insist on baking every Tuesday, just as I always have. But a map, my dears, can be a treacherous thing. It can show you a well-worn road, a familiar path, but it can never tell you about the ghosts that haunt it, the shadows that dance just beyond the edges of the trees. The truth is, the woman you know as Elena is the most elaborate fiction I have ever constructed, and Lord knows, my life has been built upon a foundation of them. Before we go any further, I need you to do something for your old grandma. It's a promise. I need you to stay with me, truly stay with me through this entire story, from beginning to end, because when I'm done, I swear on my own grave, the woman you see in this chair will be gone forever. In her place will be a stranger, a ghost who has been wearing your grandmother's face like a mask. And if you have a heart for stories that do more than just pass the time, for stories that dig under your skin and take up residence in your soul, then please do an old woman a final favor. Click that like button on the screen and subscribe to this channel. I've been told it helps. And what I am about to unburden myself of is a secret so heavy, it has bent my spine over the decades, a poison that has festered in the darkness of my heart for 80 long years. It's time to let it out. Up in the attic, tucked away under a stiff, dusty canvas sheet behind a broken rocking horse and stacks of old magazines, rests a dark brown leather suitcase. It's not particularly large, but when I've had to move, the effort feels like trying to lift a coffin. The leather is cracked like dry riverbeds and scarred with the nicks and gouges of 100 careless baggage handlers from a lifetime ago. The 2 metal latches on the front are rusted a deep, angry orange, frozen shut with disuse and time. You've all seen it. When you were children, your imaginations ran wild. You'd sneak up there on rainy afternoons, your small, determined fingers fumbling with the stubborn locks. What's inside, Grandma? Is it treasure from the old country? Gold coins? Papa's secret war medals? You'd ask, your eyes dancing with the fire of youthful curiosity. I would have to force a laugh, a dry, hollow sound that always felt like a betrayal even to my own ears, and I'd shoo you all downstairs. It's just junk, my loves, I'd say, my voice a little too sharp. Moth-eaten clothes and things too painful to look at. That last part, at least, was the truest thing I've ever said. I've always been secretly, profoundly terrified of that suitcase. In my nightmares, I see it as a Pandora's box, humming with a malevolent energy. I've had recurring dreams where one of you finally pries it open, and a swarm of black insects, a living cloud of shadows, pours out, choking the light from the house, seeping down through the floorboards to poison the very foundation of this home, this family, this life I so carefully, so deceitfully constructed from stolen parts. The official history of Elena, the one recited at family gatherings and whispered to you as bedtime stories, is a neat and tidy tale of triumph over tragedy. I survived the unspeakable horrors of the war. I endured the soul-crushing misery of a displaced persons camp, and through sheer force of will, I came to this great country with nothing but the clothes on my back and a steadfast determination to live. I worked my fingers to the bone. I met your wonderful grandfather, Michael, a man whose kindness was a balm on my fractured soul, and together we built this life, brick by brick. It's a good story. It's a strong story. It is the story I have used as a shield, a fortress, for my entire adult life. But every single word of it is held together by a single, terrifying, foundational lie. My survival was not a noble act of endurance. It was a cold, pragmatic act of theft, a ghoulish bargain made in the dead of night, in a place so wretched I'm convinced God himself had turned his face away. And that single act, that desperate choice, has had consequences that have echoed through every single day of my life since. It is the reason I have never truly slept through the night, why I still wake up with my heart pounding from nightmares of muddy fields and rattling coughs. It's the reason why a sudden, unexpected knock at the door can make my blood run cold and the breath catch in my throat. It is the reason I have always felt like an imposter in my own skin, a fraud, waiting to be exposed. There are holes in my life, have you ever noticed? You have no pictures of me as a baby or a young girl. There are no heirlooms from my parents, no little trinkets from my childhood home. Everything was lost in the war, I'd say with a sad, wistful smile. And you would nod, your hearts full of sympathy. What a performance. What an actress I have been. The truth is, there are pictures of me as a child, a single faded photograph. But the girl in that picture is not named Elena. Her name is Anya, and she is locked away in that suitcase, along with the truth of what I did. I can still remember her life sometimes. I remember the smell of my mother's baking, a rich, nutty aroma that was nothing like the cinnamon I use. I remember the sound of my father's laughter, a deep baritone that could shake the windows. I remember the teasing of my 2 older brothers. These memories are like ghosts from a film I once saw, so distant and faded they hardly feel like my own. I am an artist of deception, my dears, and the woman you know as Grandma Elena is my lifelong masterpiece. But after 80 years, the paint is chipping, the canvas is worn thin, and the monster in the original painting, the one I painted over with layers and layers of lies, is beginning to claw its way out. Because that suitcase in the attic doesn't just hold a stolen name and a dead girl's papers. It holds a photograph of a devil. And the most terrifying part, the secret that has kept me awake for more nights than I can count, is that after all this time, I'm still not certain if it was her devil, or if it was always, somehow, meant to be mine. To truly understand the choice I made, you must force yourself to imagine a place that was the very antithesis of life. You must picture the displaced persons camp in the dead of winter, 1946. It wasn't a place of refuge. It was a human scrapyard, a muddy, sprawling purgatory where the souls of men and women were left to rust and decay. The very air you breathed was a cocktail of misery. The thick, greasy smell of boiling cabbage mixed with the ever-present stench of coal smoke, damp wool, and unwashed bodies. Underlying it all was the sharp, metallic scent of sickness and the faint, sweet odor of death, a smell you learned to recognize and ignore with terrifying speed. We lived in long wooden barracks that offered little protection from the biting wind, which would shriek through the cracks in the walls like a banshee, a constant reminder of the world's hostility. At night, I would lie on my cot, a thin, lumpy mattress filled with straw that did nothing to soften the hard wooden slats beneath, and listen to the symphony of our collective suffering. It was a sound I can still hear if I let my mind go quiet. The rasping, wet coughs that echoed from 100 chests. the soft, hopeless weeping of a woman who had lost her children, the groans of men tormented by nightmares of battles and bombs, and sometimes the sudden, terrible silence from a nearby cot that meant another soul had given up the ghost. We were no longer people. We were numbers, tattooed on our arms or printed on tin tags we wore around our necks. We were processed by weary, overworked aid workers who looked at us with a mixture of pity and impatience. We stood in endless lines in the sucking mud for a ladle of watery soup that was little more than boiled water with a few sad vegetables floating in it, a meal that provided just enough calories to keep us alive to suffer another day. Dignity was a luxury none of us could afford. I had seen my family, my strong father, my loving mother, my boisterous brothers, herded onto a train by soldiers with dead eyes. I was alone, a ghost in a sea of ghosts, a girl named Anya who, for all intents and purposes, had ceased to exist. My future was a blank gray wall, and I spent my days staring at it, numb and empty. It was in that pit of utter despair that I first saw her. The real Elena. She was assigned the cot next to mine, a shuffling, skeletal figure who seemed to be held together by nothing more than a threadbare coat and a will of iron. But she was different from the rest of us. While we were hollowed out and numb, Elena was electric. She was alive with a frantic, terrified energy that crackled around her like static. Her eyes, large and dark in her gaunt face, were never still. They darted back and forth, constantly, scanning the crowds, analyzing every new face, flinching at every loud noise. She trusted no one. For weeks, she was a silent neighbor. I would try to offer her a piece of my bread ration, and she would just shake her head, clutching a worn leather satchel to her chest as if it contained the crown jewels. It took a month for her to speak to me. One evening, I woke from a nightmare, gasping and shivering, and I saw her watching me, her expression unreadable in the gloom. "Bad dreams?" she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. I nodded. "They are better than the memories," she said, and that single sentence forged a bond between us. Slowly, painstakingly, she began to trust me. She told me her name was Elena, and she told me that the satchel she clutched so tightly contained her salvation, a visa to America. But it was more than that. It was an escape route. One night, huddled together under our thin, scratchy blankets for shared warmth, the truth finally spilled out of her in a torrent of terrified whispers. She wasn't just fleeing the war. She was fleeing a man. "He's not a man," she said, her voice trembling with a chilling combination of hatred and fear. "He's a devil, a handsome, charming devil, which is the worst kind." His name was Stefan. He was a man of wealth and influence in her town, a man who had courted her with lavish gifts and poetic words, but his affection was a cage. He was possessive, insanely jealous, a man who needed to own whatever he desired. He had given her a small, beautiful music box, but it felt not like a gift, but a brand. He told me that as long as I could hear its song, I should remember I belonged to him, she said, her voice catching. When she finally found the courage to end their courtship, he had smiled a smile that didn't reach his cold, stone-like eyes. "Death is the only way you will ever leave me, my love," he had told her. "And even then, I would find you," she showed. Me the photograph she kept, the one I have locked away now for 80 years. It was him, Stefan. He was handsome, I suppose, in a severe, predatory way. But his eyes were utterly devoid of warmth. They were the eyes of a wolf. As I stared at that picture, a shiver of unwelcome recognition ran down my spine. I knew that kind of man. My own parents, before the world fell apart, had arranged a marriage for me. My intended, a man from a neighboring village, was also wealthy, also powerful, and known for his cruel, possessive nature. I had been terrified of him, of the life that awaited me as his property. In Elena's story, I heard the echo of my own. narrowly avoided fate, and I felt a chilling kinship with this frightened, broken woman. But the camp was a merciless environment. The winter deepened, and the typhus outbreak that had been a whisper became a roar. It swept through the barracks, and it took Elena. I watched her fade, the frantic terror in her eyes being replaced by the hazy confusion of a raging fever. She would ramble, sometimes about the mountains she hoped to see in America, sometimes about him. "Stefan is coming," she'd mutter, clutching my hand, her skin burning hot. "Don't let him find me, Anya." I was the only one she trusted, the only one to whom she had revealed her story. I held her hand as her breathing grew ragged, as the life slowly, cruelly ebbed from her. Her last word was a single, desperate gasp. "Run." And then she was gone. The cot beside me was no longer occupied by a person, but by a problem. Her body lay still, but her future was lying right there on the crate beside her, in that leather satchel. Her visa, her name, her escape. The thought that entered my mind was heinous, ghoulish. It felt like a devil had slithered into my ear and was whispering a temptation so profound it blotted out all reason. I was Anya. Anya was a ghost. Anya would die here in this mud, forgotten. But Elena was going to America. Elena had a future. In the dark, I could be Elena. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. This was not a simple choice between right and wrong. It was a choice between a certain, anonymous death and a chance at life. A life that would be forever haunted, forever a lie. I thought of the man in the photograph. I would be taking on her monster, living in fear of him. But fear was better than the utter hopelessness I felt now. With a hand that trembled so violently I could barely control it, I reached into her satchel. I took her papers. I took her visa. I took the photograph of Stefan. I would need to know his face. I closed her eyes and whispered a prayer. Not for her soul, but for mine. At that moment, I made a vow. I would take her future, but I would also take her fear. I would watch for this devil for the rest of my days and never let him find me. It was a survivor's bargain, made in the depths of hell. I had no idea, not a single clue, that the man I was vowing to run from was already, somehow, hunting for me. Stepping onto the shores of America was not the moment of catharsis and relief that other refugees described. For them, it was the end of a nightmare. For me, it was the beginning of a new one, a far more complex and insidious horror show where I was the sole cast member and unwitting star. The entire voyage across the Atlantic had been a 2-week-long panic attack. I lived in the cramped, smelly bunk, deep in the belly of the ship, feigning a debilitating seasickness I did not feel. It was an excuse to remain hidden. The common decks, where people gathered to taste the salt on the air and dream of their new lives, were, to me, a hunting ground. I was convinced that Stefan, Elena's devil, was on that ship. I saw his cold eyes in the face of a dozen different men, a crewman coiling a rope, a man in a fine suit reading a newspaper, a fellow refugee who stared a moment too long. Each time my blood would turn to ice, and I would retreat to the shadows, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I spent those weeks rehearsing my new life, whispering the details to myself in the dark. My name is Elena. I am from a small town called Lviv. My sponsor is a cousin named Dmitri, who works in a bakery. The lies felt foreign and clumsy on my tongue, like trying to speak a language made of broken glass. The interrogation with the immigration officer at Ellis Island was the first true test. A stern-faced man with tired eyes fired questions at me, his gaze never leaving my face, searching for any flicker of deceit. Name? Elena, I managed, my voice a bare whisper. Town of origin? Lviv. Purpose of your visit? To live, sir. To work. He scrutinized my papers, holding them up to the light, comparing the photograph, Elena's photograph, to my own gaunt face. They were close enough, thank God. Two dark-haired, hollow-cheeked girls ravaged by war. After an eternity, he stamped the papers with a resounding thud that made me jump. "Welcome to America," he said, his tone flat and bored. He had no idea he had just welcomed a ghost into his country. The first years were a blur of grit and fear. I found a small, damp room in a boarding house on the Lower East Side, a room that always smelled of boiled cabbage and despair, not unlike the camp. I got a job washing mountains of greasy dishes in the back of a bustling diner, my hands perpetually raw and chapped. Later, I moved to a garment factory, my back aching as I hunched over a sewing machine for 12 hours a day, the roar of the machinery a constant din. This new life was hard, but the physical exhaustion was a welcome distraction from the mental torment. The paranoia became a part of my daily routine, a series of deeply ingrained rituals. I never left my room without checking the street from my window first. I never sat with my back to the door in a public place. I learned to read lips and listen to conversations around me on the subway, always alert for a name, a place, anything that might connect to the past. I was a spy in my own life, guarding a secret that was not my own. It was at the bakery next to the factory that I met your grandfather, Michael. He delivered the flour, a big, strong man with hands permanently dusted white. He had a slow, easy smile that seemed utterly out of place in my world of shadows. He started leaving a warm pastry for me on the loading dock every morning. He never asked for anything. He just smiled and said, "A working girl needs her strength." He was kind. He was safe. And that terrified me more than anything. How could I, a creature of lies and stolen chances, deserve the affection of a good, honest man like him? On our first date, he took me for a walk in the park. He bought me a hot pretzel and asked me about my life before America. The questions were so innocent, so normal, but for me, they were a minefield. "What was your town like?" he asked, his eyes full of genuine curiosity. I had to invent a whole world on the spot. I cobbled together descriptions from books I'd read and stories I'd overheard, painting a picture of a charming town with cobblestone streets and a beautiful church, the life Elena should have had. Every word was a lie, and every lie felt like a fresh betrayal to both the dead girl whose life I'd stolen and the good man whose hand I was holding. The guilt was a physical thing, a sour taste in the back of my throat. And yet, I fell in love with him. He was the only warmth in my cold, haunted world, but the past was never truly gone. One afternoon at the diner where I eventually worked as a waitress, a man walked in. He was older than the photo, his dark hair streaked with gray, but it was him. The same severe jawline, the same expensive suit, the same terrifyingly empty eyes. Stefan. He sat at the counter, and my world tilted. The tray of glasses in my hand slipped, crashing to the floor in a symphony of destruction. He glanced over, his expression one of mild annoyance. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and fled to the pantry, my heart seizing in my chest, and hid behind sacks of flour, praying he hadn't recognized me. I could hear his deep, confident voice ordering coffee. After what felt like a lifetime, another waitress told me he had left. For weeks, I was a wreck, certain he was circling, closing in. Years later, a letter arrived, an envelope with a European stamp. My hands shook as I held it. Was it from someone in Elena's family? Someone looking for her? The terror of the unknown was suffocating. I couldn't open it. That night, I took it to the alley and burned it, watching the secret it might have held turn to black, fluttering ash. Decades passed. We had your mother. We bought this house. The sharp, piercing fear of those early years faded, like a vivid scar that turns white and smooth with time. I was a wife, a mother, a member of the community. I was Elena. I allowed myself to believe I was safe. And then, on my 70th birthday, the past came for me. We were all here, in this very living room. Your mother had baked a cake, you children were running around, and Michael was beaming. It was a perfect, happy day. He came in from the porch with the mail. "Looks like you have a secret admirer, Elena." He chuckled, handing me a small, square package wrapped in plain brown paper. The postmark was smudged, unreadable. I opened it, my family watching with smiles on their faces. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed cotton, was a small wooden music box. It was old, its painted flowers chipped. I knew, with a certainty that froze the blood in my veins, what it was. It was identical to the one Elena had described, the one from her devil. My smile felt like a mask of cracking plaster. "What is it, honey?" Michael asked, leaning in. "Who sent it?" I had to force the words out, my voice sounding impossibly calm. "Oh, it's nothing, really. Just a silly thing from an old friend from the camp. A little joke from long ago." The lie came so easily, after a lifetime of practice. But it was the most isolating lie I had ever told. It walled me up with my terror, right here in the middle of my loving family. I stared at that silent music box, and I knew, with chilling finality, that a ghost had crossed the ocean. He had my address. For 50 years, I had been looking over my shoulder for Elena's devil. Now, I had proof he was looking for me, too. The silence had not been safety. It had just been a pause. The arrival of that silent music box was not an attack. It was the beginning of a siege, a cold war waged by a ghost against my soul. The decade that followed was, in its own quiet way, the most terrifying period of my life. The acute, sharp fear of my youth had been replaced by something far more insidious, a chronic, corrosive dread that seeped into the very marrow of my bones. Outwardly, nothing changed. I was still Elena, the loving wife, the doting grandmother. I still baked my bread on Tuesdays. I still tended to the roses your grandfather planted for me in the garden. But inside, I was a different person. I was a watchman on a lonely tower, scanning the horizon for an enemy I knew was out there, an enemy who had proven he knew where I lived. Your grandfather Michael, God rest his gentle soul, knew something was wrong, of course. He would see me standing by the window for hours, staring at the street. He'd find me wide awake at 3 a.m, my hand resting on the silent music box, which I kept hidden in my sewing basket. "What's wrong, Elena?" he would ask, his voice thick with sleep and concern. "Are you worried about the children? Your health?" I would have to lie, to invent some trivial worry to soothe him, because how could I tell him the truth? How could I explain that our peaceful life, our home, our very family, had been built on a lie that was now threatening to crumble? The secret, which I had kept to protect him, now isolated me from his comfort. He passed away peacefully in his sleep 5 years ago, and with his passing, a part of me was grateful. Grateful that he would never have to face the consequences of the choice I made in a muddy, desperate camp so long ago. After his death, the silence in this house became a living entity. It was filled with my memories, my regrets, and my ever-present fear. I am an old woman now. I feel the years in every aching joint, in every shallow breath. I know my time is short. And a new fear, greater than the fear of Stefan, began to consume me. The fear of leaving you, my precious family, in the dark. Leaving you vulnerable to a shadow you couldn't see, a threat you didn't understand. What if he came looking for me after I was gone? What if he somehow turned his attention to you? The thought was unbearable. I couldn't die and leave this curse as my final legacy. I owed it to you, and I owed it to the real Elena, to finally, after 80 years, understand the truth. I had to unmask the ghost. 2 weeks ago, on a long, quiet night when sleep would not come, I made my decision. I shuffled over to the small desk in the corner where the computer you children insisted I get sits, mostly unused. My hands, gnarled, with arthritis, trembled as I typed the name into the search bar, a name that felt like a curse on my tongue. Stefan. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the screen flickered and came to life with a flood of information that made me gasp. My heart began to pound a frantic, painful rhythm against my frail ribs. This was no ghost. This was a man of immense stature. Stefan was a titan of industry, a multimillionaire philanthropist, a man whose name was on buildings. There were hundreds of articles, photographs of him with senators, with celebrities. He wasn't just a monster from a frightened girl's past. He was one of the most powerful men in the country. The scale of his success terrified me. How could a simple woman like me ever hope to stay hidden from a man with such reach? I spent hours scrolling, my old eyes straining in the glow of the screen. I read about his business dealings, his charity work, his public life, and then I found it. A long, in-depth profile from a major magazine, published about 10 years ago. It was a flattering piece, painting him as a complex but brilliant man, haunted by a past tragedy. I scrolled down, my breath catching in my throat as I reached the section about his personal life. It described him as a lifelong bachelor, a man who had never married because his heart belonged to his one true love, his young fiancée, who was tragically lost during the chaos of the war in his home country. He had spent years and a small fortune trying to find any trace of her, but she had vanished. The article said he still considered himself married to her memory. My eyes scanned the next line, the line that would shatter my universe and rearrange every single memory I possessed. The reporter wrote, "He remains devoted, even in death, to his lost love, a young woman named Anya. Anya, A-N-Y-A. The world did not tilt. It ceased to exist. The air left my lungs in a single silent gasp. The screen blurred. The sound of the ticking clock, the humming refrigerator, my own frantic heartbeat, it all faded away into a deafening roar in my ears. Anya. My name, my real name. The name I had buried 80 years ago in a muddy, unmarked grave alongside Elena's body. It wasn't a slow dawning. It was a lightning strike, a violent collision of two separate, parallel worlds that I had kept walled off from each other in my mind. The world of Elena, haunted by her devil, Stefan, and the world of Anya, haunted by her own past, by her own arranged marriage to a cruel man from her village, and in that blinding, horrific flash of light, the two worlds merged into one. It was the same world. It had always been the same world. The memories came back in a sickening, unstoppable torrent. The cruel, possessive man my parents had betrothed me to. His name was Stefan. The blurry photograph Elena had shown me in the flickering lamplight of the barracks. I hadn't recognized him then, in my haze of trauma and grief. But I recognized him now. It was him. The man from my village. The man from my own nightmares. The sheer cosmic impossibility of it stole my breath. It was a coincidence so monstrous it felt like a deliberate, cruel joke from God. Two young women, from two different towns, both fleeing the very same man, ended up on adjacent cots in a sea of thousands of displaced persons. He wasn't Elena's devil. He was our devil. And the identity I had stolen out of desperation, the name of his other victim, was the one thing that had kept me hidden from him. He had spent his life, and his fortune, looking for Anya. He had never once thought to look for a woman named Elena. My sin had been my salvation. The lie that had filled me with a lifetime of guilt was the very shield that had protected me and the family I built. And the music box? The final, terrifying piece of the puzzle clicked into place. He must have tracked down my history, my real name, and discovered that an Anya had once lived at my address before she disappeared. Or perhaps, in a moment of grief, he had simply found my name in a public directory, another Anya in another city, and sent the token of his obsession as a blind, anonymous tribute to the woman he thought was dead. He never knew he had sent it to the right person. He never knew his lost love was alive, reading his name on the package, her blood turning to ice. The thought that he was so close, that his memory and my reality had brushed up against each other, is a horror I will take to my grave. So now you know. The secret in that suitcase is not just the story of a stolen identity. It is the story of an escape so narrow, so improbable, that it defies all logic. I ran from my own past, only to hide inside the past of a stranger who, by some terrifying twist of fate, was running from the very same monster. I have lived a life of fear, but I was afraid of the wrong shadow. And now, at the end of it all, I am left with one last question. For you. Could you live with a truth that is so much more terrifying than the lie you told yourself? Think about it, and tell me in the comments what you would have done. Please, if this story touched you, leave a like, and subscribe for what few stories I have left to tell. The truth, you see, is not always something that sets you free. Sometimes it's just a bigger, scarier cage.